For a long time, we were taught that fat was bad for us. So we stripped it out of our food, replaced it with sugar and refined carbohydrates, and what happened? The rates of chronic disease continue to rise. Now, the science has shifted, and fat is no longer this isolated villain that we once thought it was. But there's still a lot of confusion around which fats support our health. So today we're talking about fat within the context of the Mediterranean diet and why choosing the right kind of fat is one of the most powerful things that you can do for your heart and your brain. So we're going to talk about fats in terms of fat quality and food context. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, when we look at fat quality, there's one clear example where the science is very settled, and that's industrial trans fats. So these fats are strongly linked to cardiovascular disease, and based on that evidence, they were actually banned in Canada. So that's a major public health win. And as a result, industrial trans fats have largely been removed from the Canadian food supply and now are much less of a concern. Other fats, though, like saturated fat, are more nuanced. So saturated fats like butter, red meat, and cheese, they were once blamed for everything, but we now know that moderate amounts from whole foods can fit within a balanced diet as long as they're consumed in moderation. And this is where we have to mention ultra-processed foods. Because when saturated fats are incorporated into ultra-processed foods in large amounts, and then combined with refined carbohydrates, refined sugar, and all sorts of other additives, now you have this food environment, this combination that is associated with higher inflammation and poor metabolic health. So we definitely need to limit ultra-processed foods as much as possible. If you're not 100% sure what ultra-processed foods are, you can check out the video linked below where Rachel Parent does a great deep dive breaking this all down. The takeaway here is not that fat is bad, it's the quality of the fat and the context of the overall diet that matters. So what about fats within the Mediterranean diet? Well, the overarching principle in the Mediterranean diet is to choose whole natural foods. So the Mediterranean diet focuses on fats from real food, not fats found in ultra-processed foods. So yes, some saturated fats like butter, cheese, and red meat are consumed in moderation. But the majority of fat in the Mediterranean diet comes from unsaturated fats like olive oil, nuts, seeds, and fish. So let's start by talking about olive oil. This is kind of like the hallmark of the Mediterranean diet. In large long-term studies, people who regularly use olive oil are linked to having better heart health over time. Why? And how does that actually work? Let's just talk about the heart disease process for a minute. Most people think heart disease starts when cholesterol clogs the arteries. The reality is, cholesterol is involved, but heart disease often begins long before cholesterol becomes the main problem. Let me explain. Heart disease often starts when the inner lining of our blood vessels, called the endothelium, becomes irritated and inflamed, something known as endothelial dysfunction. Now, what are some things that can contribute to this? Chronically high blood sugar, high blood pressure, smoking, and ultra-processed foods have all been linked to chronic inflammation and endothelial dysfunction. So what happens when that endothelial lining is damaged or inflamed? Well, it becomes more sticky, making it easier for LDL cholesterol to enter and get trapped in the artery wall. And just to be clear, LDL cholesterol isn't bad on its own. We actually need it. But inside an inflamed blood vessel, it's much more likely to become damaged or oxidized. And the body reacts to that damage. And over time, plaque can begin to form, a process called atherosclerosis. Eventually, calcium can accumulate within that plaque, stiffening the arteries and increasing the risk of heart attacks and strokes. Now, what does any of this have to do with olive oil? Well, olive oil is rich in monounsaturated fats, a type of unsaturated fat that has been consistently associated with better heart health. And it contains plant compounds called polyphenols. Research shows that together, these compounds may help reduce inflammation and support the function of the endothelium, that delicate inner lining of our blood vessels. In other words, olive oil may help create a healthier environment inside the artery wall, making it less inflamed and less sticky, so blood can flow smoothly and cholesterol is less likely to get trapped in the first place. And that's one reason why populations that regularly consume olive oil tend to show lower rates of heart diseases. Now, olive oil is not a magic bullet, but the point is, when it's part of a larger dietary pattern, that can shift your risk of heart disease in a healthier direction over time. Now, just going beyond heart health for a moment, it's still early science, but there's some interesting research on the Mediterranean diet and Alzheimer's risk. If you want to hear more about this, head back to our second video in this series where we talk more about that. Now, what about some of the other fats in the Mediterranean diet, like nuts and seeds? Well, like olive oil, these two show very similar benefits. Some nuts and seeds, like walnuts, flax, and chia, provide plant-based omega-3 fats, which are associated with heart and brain health. When people eat nuts and seeds regularly, studies show healthier cholesterol profiles and lower long-term cardiovascular risk. Walnuts are a really great example here. They're especially rich in both omega-3 and polyphenols, and again, can help support blood vessel function. Seeds play a similar role here. A spoonful of ground chia, flax, or pumpkin seeds adds healthy fats, fiber, and micronutrients to your diet, which again are linked to vascular health. So the takeaway here is not to fear fat, but to choose high quality whole food fats like extra virgin olive oil, nuts, and seeds, which can support your blood vessels over time. Now, I know we still haven't talked about fatty fish yet and all the healthy omega-3 fats found in fish, but stay tuned for episode 8 on protein, where we'll deep dive into the fish topic.